Hello there and welcome to another live chapter reading for Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today I shall be reading from The Divine Devils by Weir. Chapter 1. Lance Shepherd stood outside the sprawling mansion on this cool middle of May morning, waiting patiently for the two teenage kids he was assigned to protect. He tapped his silver watch nervously in rhythm with his pulse as if to make time slow down. Rory lined his cleanly shaven and irritated face. If they didn't leave soon, he was going to get the kids to school late, which would set off a chain reaction of anger from their mother. She dreaded a riot act several times about punctuality, placing the blame squarely on his shoulders, though it was rarely his fault. When hired, the 34-year-old head of security didn't comprehend what was involved organising protection for two teenagers. Out of his element in dealing with a soon-to-be 18-year-old female high school senior and a 15-year-old male who was a freshman, a decision he often regretted these past weeks. Each of the teenagers had their own agenda, neither of which lined up with each other's or Lance's, which was to get them to their destination on time and in one piece. Even with a loaded Glock on his hip, hidden by his favourite black leather jacket, they had no fear of repercussions, and harsh words couldn't convince them to move any faster. For Lance, this meant that once the teenagers decided to present themselves, his team would have to race to the school, opening a possibility of mistakes being made, leading to danger he might not be able to prevent, even with the two other skilled members of his teams as backup. The son was the first to show up, dressed in brown shorts, high-top sneakers, a defiant t-shirt his parents probably hated, carrying a bright blue backpack that was overstuffed to the point it was tearing in spots. Dayon's long straightened black hair with crimson streaks was swept back and held in place by a substance that came out of a spray can, making it look shiny and a bit oily. In contrast to his brown skin, his right ear sparkled from an earring that may have been a diamond, a statement of his family's wealth. Though his genealogy said he'd be over 6 foot someday, the teenager's growth spurt had thus far eluded him. Instead, he stood around 5'4" and was a lean 120 pounds. He strolled outside without a word, his nose buried in his oversized iPhone, as he about ran into Lance before climbing through the waiting open door into the back seat of the limousine. A normal part of the daily routine that left Lance feeling more like an annoyance than a man trying to protect them. Checking his watch again, knowing their first class would be starting soon, Lance began heading into the house, his aggravation growing, when he saw all 5'11" of Olivia coming his way. She was wearing a long black skirt, matching boots with a lot of heel, and a red blouse with open-shouldered sleeve covering her slender frame. Her straight shoulder-length ebony hair with jade highlights flowed as she walked, covering her ears and hiding the wireless earbuds that were blasting the music she listened to every morning. She slung a shiny black purse over one shoulder and grey pack over the other. Her left hand cradling her iPhone lovingly, she strutted like a movie star in her black leather boots, smiling as she passed Lance and joined her brother in the back seat. Lance took a couple of relaxing breaths, trying to find calm, the two teenagers testing him, showing little respect for the job he was doing. He didn't expect to be best buds with them, for they had little in common. Still, it would have been nice if a time or two they would show him a little courtesy. Thankfully, the pay was top of the line, a fact he reminded himself of each and every vexing morning. 3 members of the security team took their places, one behind the wheel, the other in the front seat, while Lance sat in the back with the 2 kids. Reggie, the driver, drove the limo out and down the winding driveway from the Colorado Springs foothill-based home, leaving the 1% tax bracket neighbourhood for the public school their mother and father insisted they attend. "Can we stop the music for a minute to cover things?" inquired Lance, waving to get the kids' attention. Dayon looked up from his iPhone, a frown on his face. Olivia seemed to ignore him completely, her head slightly bobbing while lip-syncing to the songs saturating her eardrums. Perturbed, Lance reached over and swept back her hair, removing one of the cordless headphones. "Hey!" she bellowed in anger, waving as if I was swatting a fly bothering her. "The song was getting to my favourite part." "Pause the music and listen," Lance stated firmly, his expression serious. "You know we have to go over what to do in case of trouble." Olivia reached down and tapped the pause button. "Why do we have to do this every day?" Lance handed her the white earpiece. "Because you need to be prepared in case of danger. It's been several weeks since the last incident. I keep telling Mum it was just some muggers." Lance shook his head, unconvinced by her logic. "Highly unlikely." "And how would you know?" Olivia quipped back angrily. "They showed up and tried to drag you out of the car. When your boyfriend attempted to stop them, they beat the crap out of him." "He wasn't my boyfriend," answered Olivia defiantly with a shrug. "No, it was just some guy with his hand up a blouse," uttered Dayon with a sotty smirk. Olivia turned her head. "How would you know?" "Word gets out around school," replied Dayon, his nose still buried in his iPhone. Who knows what else you'd have let him do if you hadn't been interrupted. I hear football players won't go out with you a second time unless they get a blowjob on the first date. Olivia punched him in the arm in a fit of rage. Dayon tried to retaliate, but Lance grabbed his wrist, stopping him. It was enough they didn't respect Lance, but it was another that they didn't respect each other, which pissed him off. "Enough," he yelled. "You two need to be there for each other. Do you understand?" Olivia crossed her arms, pouting while mumbling under her breath. It was a reaction Lance had seen many times and wasn't affected. Even though she was still a week from turning 18, Olivia still had a lot of growing up to do. His job wasn't to babysit spoilt children, but to protect them, though he often wondered if he wasn't just a highly paid nanny. "You both need to be clear on what to do when danger arises," stressed Lance, his finger pointing at them. "If you make the wrong move and panic, you're dead. Is that clear enough?" He was being a little dramatic for effect, but he needed them to get the seriousness of their situation. They would likely be taken and not killed, at least not immediately. The threat to them appeared real, though for what the reason was still a mystery. His job right now was to make sure they remained safe until the police had a better idea of what was going on, though nothing today had brought the investigators to any concrete conclusions. Now that he had their attention, Lance started going over what to do in case of trouble. The limo was built with steel reinforcement on the chassis, making it bulletproof. The glass was also resistant to gunfire, but could be penetrated with a powerful enough weapon. It was an impressive vehicle, but still, anyone making an aggressive attempt could get to the children. Fortunately, it was a short drive to the Cheyenne Mountain High School, down Cresta Road, a hilly, winding street that led to the main driveway of the school. Because they were running late, there would be a lot of traffic dropping off students. Normally, you'd run into a backup of cars coming and going, making for congestion he wanted to avoid, but once again couldn't, thanks to the tardiness of his clients. Lance noticed Dayon had a frown on his face, looking at his iPhone screen in disgust. "My streaming music stopped playing," he stated out loud, tapping the reason. "My phone says no service for some reason." Olivia looked at her phone, confirming what her brother had said, shaking it as if it would help. Lance had never experienced a dead zone at this location previously, which concerned him. Pulling out his phone from his inner jacket pocket, he unlocked the screen, seeing no service, just as they turned into Cresta Road from Constellation Drive. He moved the phone up and down, hoping for a connection which never came. They had only travelled a block when they were rammed by a heavy moving object, halting the limo's motion as it slid sideways off the street and onto a grass shoulder that dipped downward slightly. Lance was shaken, immediately gathering himself, checking the teenagers for obvious signs of injury. "Are you two hurt?" Lance asked of the two kids. They glared at each other, shock and surprise filling their expressions. After a short pause and a quick check of their extremities, they both replied they weren't injured. "What the hell happened?" shouted Olivia, uncertainty causing her body to shake. Dayon glanced around, wondering the same thing, his hand gripping the armrest tightly. Lance was uncertain what had happened. He glanced outside the window to see what had hit them. A heavy-duty jacked-up pickup truck with a large metal grille had ploughed into them, and was now backing up to bar them from moving forward. From behind the truck, a big dark SUV spun sideways, obstructing the rear, impeding their escape. Checking his phone again, Lance continued to see the no-service message. Their attackers likely using cell jammers. He yelled up front to see if his men were awake. Reggie, the driver, was out cold. George was alert, suffering a few bruises and cuts he was shaking off. They needed to act quickly. "Remain calm," explained Lance with a tranquil force in his voice. "I'll be getting out. You know what to do. No matter what, don't come out unless we use a safe word. Despite what you hear, do you understand?" He saw fear in their eyes and a bit of panic. It was an emotion he wanted to avoid, though he knew the circumstances would be difficult. Under the circumstances, even for himself. "It'll be okay, just like we talked about and trained for. Push the button and get down to safety." They both responded affirmatively, doing as they had been trained. Confirming they were now concealed, Lance opened the door, rolling his toned 6-foot-plus body to the grassy ground, closing it quickly, the door locked behind him. He'd seen men through the one-way rear glass getting out of the SUV, appearing to be heavily armed. The front passenger door opened and out jumped George, his Glock in hand. A man came round the front, his high-powered weapon pointed, and George fired. He hit the assailant in the throat, but the man got off 2 shots, striking George, who clutched his chest before slumping over onto the ground. Blood seeping over his clothing and pavement, his eyes open but clearly dead, with no pulse to be found. Lance removed his hand from the neck, reacting to a noise behind him. firing a rush round, missing the mark before getting hit in the right shoulder. The force knocked him to the ground and he attempted to roll away, hoping to switch his gun to his other hand, but couldn't. Lan found himself stopped by the sun-blocking big man who had a large AR-15 pointed at him, the combined emotions of anger, fear and pain gripping him. "Slide the gun over," ordered the big man who was dressed all in black, his voice deep and raspy while his face was covered by a black hood. Lance had no idea who he was facing, only knowing he was outgunned. Seeing two other men with weapons surrounding the car, their faces shielded by cloth, he pushed the gun away as best he could with his injured limb. "We want the kids," demanded the big man after pocketing the Glock. "Tell them it's safe and to open the door." While clutching his bleeding shoulder, Lance shook his head, pride and toughness preventing him from giving up the kids. He was holding out, hoping to buy time until the police arrived. "The limo's a decoy," Lance announced, trying to sound convincing through the pain. "They aren't with us." "We know better," replied the gunman, not believing the revelation. "Call out to them or I take out a knee." "You can't hurt much more than the shoulder," stated Lance through the agony. "So be it." The man fired the gun, striking Lance above the left knee. His scream echoed off the limo when the agony meter rose. Despite what he'd hoped, Lance cursed at the man, his left hand now clutching the knee, but he held fast in defiance. It was his job to protect them, even if it meant his life. "Tough and stupid," commented the big man, "but not worth killing you for." He turned to the other men, knowing time was short before the authorities arrived. "Pry it open." One of the men came from behind with a large pry bar. Lance watched as he jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame of the car, and after a few tries to got the door open. He looked inside but didn't find anyone. The kids were nowhere to be found. A final thought of happiness filling Lance's soul, knowing they were out of reach of these men before he closed his eyes. "Where the fuck are they?" yelled the big man, pissed at the revelation. The big man kicked at the motionless Lance, finding him passed out from the pain, not able to answer. Could it really have been a decoy? Was their inside information wrong? "Check the trunk," ordered the big man. The crunching sound of metal on metal filled the air as the pry bar opened it easily to find nothing inside but a spare tyre and a toolbox. In the background, sirens could be heard, the men knowing their time was short. "Fuck," uttered the big man. "Let's get out of here. Grab our man and blow the truck." With the dead team member unceremoniously tossed into the back of the SUV, they drove off, the large ramming truck exploding into flames via the remote detonation, sending debris everywhere, blocking the road on all sides. Their escape path had been mapped out before the job and had been done with precision. They had disappeared down the back roads before two Colorado Springs patrol cars arrived. A shocking moment in what was normally a quiet, crime-free area of the city. Violence today had reached out and grabbed hold, leaving a war zone of debris and bodies. I hope you enjoyed the chapter reading and that you'll go check out the book. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.